Come on.
For some reason,
When I was out with Justin, he showed me over on the Kaibab where the antelope were using the pronghorn were using some of the power lines corridor.
well, and there's a log. It's not really providing much value, but
Actually,
you
Henry,
can see.
what's cool about this is when you drop down on this bottom, how the site changes. It's got deeper soil, and it's actually a fairly decent basalt site.
So that's something that we talk about as we walk down this hill. It's about how it transitions. So, I mean, just look at the number of trees, the stuff that's on the ground, the oaks, and as we get to the bottom of this hill, which is really getting to the core of where these owls are, it's grassy. That's where your voles live. You start getting some fatter trees and a little bit taller trees. So it's just different things to pay attention to. That's what I was looking for, little vole
Little trails.
trails. I didn't see any when we get down here in the little grass.
We
but-
saw some the other day out at Pickett Lake area, or one of, maybe it was over on the other pasture,
But yeah, you could definitely see a lot more oak, especially as you come down here. It's just not as contiguous as we would normally see in a pack of 600 acres.
Yeah.
But and then it's just so thick in there, so doggone thick that.
And think about hunting in there. If they're perching and they see something and they got to fly through all these branches, I mean, that's going to reduce hunting effectiveness.
It goes back to there's no food in there. You know, I mean, very little. So you got some logs, and I'm sure they're hunting and taking advantage of that. But man, there could be skinny mice.
what you would ordinarily think of as what a pack looks like.
So we just, I mean, we might not have quite as thick, large trees, lots of oak, and we're seeing lots of decent oak, like in here. It's just not very contiguous, right? So here, for a 600 protected activity center breeding site, we would expect that to be pretty widespread throughout. But in this particular pack, you've just got small little groups of decent habitat. But they're using it,
And so it's, you say they haven't nested and produced young,
that we know of.
so it might be sink habitat.
Yep.
Well, it might be sink, or it might be providing a place for young owls to establish where they don't have to compete with dominant animals. And if they're not reproducing here, that counts as sink. But if they form a pair bond and then can move into a better area, or treatments improve the area around it, then it can be a productive site. So it's not necessarily sink, but it does set up like that. And sink habitat is where you draw an animal in and there's enough for them to make a commitment, establish a territory or home range, and try to make a living, but not able to reproduce. And so they're worse off than if the habitat was a bit worse and they just moved on to a different area entirely. But the oak is, it's getting large DBH, but there are just no large DBH pine in here, and owls for nesting and roosting are associated with the big trees. When we're doing the planning for fry, we were doing individual pack reviews, and we got into one pack where there was just a series of all these huge oak that had fallen over because the pack had turned into a dog hair stand. And that's where Fish and Wildlife was saying, yes, we do need to come in and actively manage, because we were losing the very basics for a pack, losing the oak and the pine oak component.
So some of our treatments around, when we have those large oaks, we like to actually, if we can, thin the pines around it so they're not shaded out, because that's what will be overtopped and go out of the system. Also decreases some of that moisture competition, because again, competition for moisture in Arizona is one of the key items on success or failure of a plant.
And then even if owls aren't using the area, oak are one of the few mass-producing species in northern Arizona, and it drives a lot of wildlife populations. So whether or not owls are benefiting, wildlife in general will get a lot of benefits. And yeah, we weren't cutting any oak in fry, at least in the first fry, and no aspen unless it was part of an aspen regeneration effort.
And those numbers you were talking about on the treatments, that was in the first 4-4 AIS. In the second 4-4 AIS, we have 3 times more packs, and we're looking at probably treatment within 70 of them. We haven't determined that yet because we're still in analysis, but the opportunity to actually get in there and actively manage is really key for us and for fish and wildlife.
And we talk a lot about packs, owls, so the Mexican spotted owls, but the other critter, and one that we have right here that we manage for, is goshawks. And it just happens that they overlap the same habitat. It's kind of funny because I was looking for owls, but I found goshawks in this particular pack. So they use a lot of the same characteristics, but obviously one's diurnal and the other's not. It's nocturnal. And, so it's pretty interesting when you manage for a variety of species. It's not just that particular species that you manage for. So it's not just owls that benefit. It's all those critters that depend on oaks. So think about turkeys, bears, all those different critters that
elk.
benefit from it. Elk, I think, benefit from freeways. I don't know. But yeah, it's if you just make those conscious efforts to really manage for keeping all the components on the land, that intelligent tinkering, and letting the land tell you how it needs to be managed, I don't know how you can go wrong, personally.
Yeah.
What is it about the oak? Does it just make for better nesting? Is that
Yeah, they
It's
don't.
cavities.
Yeah, better
It's cavities, and then oaks provide mass, so they're food.
Yeah.
It's a very high protein food source, and why you would want to manage for oaks is just think about how long it takes for an oak to germinate, and then grow, and then produce mass, and then get to a size where, like this one back here, where it dies or part of it dies, and it's actually providing habitat. I mean, that's hundreds of years for just one plant or one tree. And if somebody comes with a chainsaw, or we come in and we just wipe it out, it's like, oh my God, it's just, I mean, I know folks don't think about it necessarily that way, but it is. I mean, you start cutting these oaks here, they're what, 8 inches? Well, they're never going to get to be anything if you cut them right now. And right now, they're probably just starting to produce mass. So another couple hundred years, they might start to provide cavities. That's a long time.
And meanwhile, we're talking, the forest is almost entirely ponderosa pine. Oak is one of the few other species to attain tree structure. Well, the oak have different arthropods living in the bark than the pine do, so it's a different resource for the foraging birds, bark foraging, for the woodpeckers and associated families. So it's adding diversity. And Henry mentioned intelligent tinkering. Anyone who hasn't read
Sand County Almanac.
Sand County Almanac, thank you. The first rule of intelligent tinkering is save all the parts. And people should Google that if you're not familiar with it, because it was written, a series of essays. It's just as applicable today as it's ever been. But the field of wildlife management kind of grew from that. Aldo Leopold was the author. Aldo Leopold worked in Arizona and New Mexico, and some of what he writes about, his big breakthroughs and his thinking and understanding, came from these forests. And we have a different situation, but his thoughts and guidelines are as applicable as ever. And in general, increasing diversity is a good thing. But wildlife, it's hard to just do hard and fast rules. We had a project that was being funded by another agency to get rid of sage and increase the diversity. But species associated with sage are decreasing rapidly. And the district had a lot of trouble understanding that increasing the diversity was a bad thing in that situation. But here we're trying to retain the pieces. 4-Fry is an experiment in intelligent tinkering, so that if we set it back up and allow the system to move in the direction it evolved, hopefully it'll stay resilient, healthy, and provide for a wide range of wildlife. that's an instance where diversity is a good thing.
And again, I'm going to go up your bark arthropods, the structure of ponderosa pine. Every age class of ponderosa pine has a different set of bugs associated with the bark, which has a different set of birds associated with those species. So that's why we want to have that structure of young age, mid-age, and old trees through the landscape, just looking at ponderosa pine. Then you start adding the other trees in there, then you start getting different assemblages that are real key to holding things together.
And there will always be winners and losers. In the ponderosa pine in South Dakota, there was research, and they grouped birds into guilds, and every guild increased by moving it from, similar to what we have, basically dog hair stands of middle-aged trees, and trying to move them into groups and clumps and move trees into the older and larger size classes, except for bark gleaners. They took a hit, but as we said earlier, if you have groups of trees, and then especially when you manage for goshawk and spotted owl, you can have large groups, tens of acres. So you're not going to lose those guilds. They'll be here. They'll decrease in numbers, but it's sort of like the squirrel. They're probably decreasing to something closer to historic levels because the structure is moving towards the historic levels. But the bark gleaners take a hit, but if we leave it as it is, essentially all the other guilds of birds are taking a hit. And so we're trying to increase the health of the overall system and not just target one thing. So when we're doing owl management or goshawk management, we're managing for a wide range of species under the guise of that one species name. So we're not putting the forest at risk because it's only goshawks or only owls. It's a way to ensure we retain these higher trophic level predators while we maintain a functional ecosystem.
And we started somewhat touch on, we didn't give it a name, is those different structures is uneven age management.
Right.
So that's one of the things that we want to be going towards uneven age management, just because of that diversity of structural components and the associated species that are associated with it, both plants and animals. So the other type of management that we had been doing was even age management, where you actually are managing towards everything as one age class, and we actually have it's a forest management term. With our old forest plants, we managed to 120-year rotation. Anything over 120 years was considered excess stocking, so we removed it. So we cut all our old trees. Any wonder we got sued? Not really. You know, we were doing it from a strictly timber management perspective. Forest Service in the early 90s changed to an ecosystem management and actually started embracing the uneven age concept. And that is what we try and do, is manage for uneven age. Now if you look at this stand here, it's even age. It's all one age. How do you manage for multiple age classes in one age? It's just one age class. We start actually cutting it, start getting that regeneration, and we'll start getting that second cohort in. These trees will eventually get to old growth. We can't make an 80-year-old tree a 150-year-old tree automatically, but we actually provide the resilience and let it grow. We'll get that coming in, we'll get that next cohort coming in, then we'll get that next cohort in. I mean, age management is 3 different tree cohorts within the same system, at least 3, and you can have more than that. So that is one of our big emphasis items, is to work towards uneven age management across the landscape and fit our desired conditions based on the number of trees per acre, on the where that site is. High sites have more trees per acre, low sites, low trees per acre. Pattern based on looking at our evidences, have that inform it. So there's a lot of information that goes into getting towards our desired conditions.
Yeah, and if you talk about, I mean, what Dick is touching on is your forest, right? So your seral stages. Not sure if you guys have talked about seral stages yet. But you have that early young forest, a lot of small trees. You get to mid-age forest. It's still very even age, and then it stays longest in an old, I don't want to call it old growth, but an old age forest. So when you have mature trees everywhere, go to the North Rim and take a look up there, and imagine if fire was continued, was never interrupted. you've got a lot of old trees. Well, it stays that way for a long time, and it's probably most resilient in that stage for the longest period of time. So really, we're just living in a time where maybe we're at mid-age forests, and you know, when we talk about human span, we're not going to get to see it ever get to that old age. But all we're trying to do with 4-Fry is just put it on a trajectory. That's all. I used to do turkey roost surveys. I don't know if you guys ever did that. So basically what you do is you walk the upper third of ridge lines and you look for big ass trees. And then if they have a clear glide path, so from the top of the ridge, if they can just glide to the tree, to the branch, and then from the branch, if they could glide down if something disturbs them, it's a roost. And it was so much fun. I mean, I think we ended up walking up to 14 miles a day on these ridges. It was very cool. But you could just see it. Oh yeah, there's a big tree over there. Yeah. And
But
sure
you did or
enough,
didn't have to see a turkey? You just have had that
well,
component?
There'd be scratch.
Oh, okay.
poop under the trees, and it was just clear. Like I'm standing here at the road, they had a place where they could fly off of without hitting tree, and a place to fly up, and always a roost. And then we just GPS it, and it would be like, you know, it's not that.
So during turkey hunting,
I did get a turkey tag, and I did not. I couldn't bring myself to go to the roost I knew of, and that was hard because I couldn't find it.
That's like turning on your family.
Yeah, I know there's a rooster right there.
so this is the Clark task order. It's a different contract mechanism than what we used on the Howard sale. Remember, on the Howard sale, we said we had to pile the slash and burn it. This contract actually requires the chipping and removal of all the slash. So that's one way we could actually, if we have markets, we can actually have that slash removed and remove that smoke impact that we can have from burning our activity fuels. So different contract, different types, and we try and actually match that to what our markets are. Again, this is an output of our restoration activities. The landscape behind us is actually a different treatment type based on Mexican spotted owl recovery habitat, so it's actually a little thicker than what we've seen in our previous treatments. By thicker, I mean it's more basal area retained on site. Our group organization is so obvious we have less interspace. So it actually is tied to our Mexican spotted owl recovery plan. The output of that are the logs you see behind me. So after we've done our NEPA analysis, after we've designed the treatment on the ground, we go to implementation. And one of the outputs of implementation in this case is actually some forest products. So one of our objectives in 4-Fry 2 is actually to create sustainable jobs for appropriately sized industry. As you see here, these are not big old trees. I mean, this is our average size is across the landscape averages between 5 and 18 inches. That's not make a good board. But we do provide these forest products, and they are outputs of our restoration activities.
But all we're trying to do with 4-Fry is just put it on a trajectory. That's all.